Recovered Guild Expedition Report. Status: unresolved. Begin record.
There are monsters that kill because they're hungry. There are monsters that kill because they're threatened. And then there are monsters that kill because they have already decided exactly where you're going to die. The Guild's official report classified the incident as a failed expedition, a navigation error, unexpected environmental hazards, aggressive territorial behavior from a Rathalos, simple explanations, comforting explanations. But when the surviving records were recovered from the region, when the journals were compared, when the timelines were reconstructed, a different picture emerged. The expedition wasn't lost. It was trapped. Every bridge that burned, every trail that collapsed, every missing supply cache, every attack, every retreat, every desperate decision made by the survivors had already been anticipated, because something was watching them from above, watching, waiting, guiding, not toward safety, but deeper into its territory, toward a place where escape had never been possible. And by the time they realized they were being hunted, the Rathalos had already spent days preparing the kill. Tonight, we examine one of the most disturbing predator encounters ever recorded in Monster Hunter history. The story of a Rathalos that didn't attack intruders. It controlled them. When most hunters think of Rathalos, they imagine power, a blazing king of the skies, an apex predator capable of dominating entire ecosystems through strength alone. But power isn't what makes a Rathalos dangerous. It's control. In the wild, Rathalos doesn't simply fly around looking for things to burn. It rules territory. It patrols, observes, learns. Every creature living beneath its domain understands invisible boundaries. Aptonoth migration routes shift around its nesting grounds. Smaller wyverns avoid its hunting paths. Even large monsters often choose detours rather than challenge the ruler of the skies. A mature Rathalos isn't merely occupying territory, it's managing it. And in a remote, unexplored region beyond established guild maps, one expedition would discover what happens when that territorial intelligence reaches its horrifying extreme. This is the story of the Sky King's hunt. The expedition consisted of 14 people, researchers, cartographers, 2 hunters assigned as escorts, supply personnel, a small but experienced team. Their objective seemed straightforward: survey an isolated valley system recently discovered beyond a chain of volcanic highlands. No confirmed large monster population, no major threats, no prior guild presence. Just another unexplored region waiting to be documented. The first 3 days were uneventful. The valley was beautiful: dense forests, ancient stone formations, elevated plateaus connected by natural bridges, fresh water, abundant herbivore populations, ideal conditions for a long-term research outpost. Several members even commented on how strangely peaceful the region felt. There were no major predator sightings, no large territorial disputes, no obvious signs of danger. Looking back, that should have been the first warning, because healthy ecosystems don't become peaceful by accident. Something was keeping them that way. The first indication of trouble appeared on day 4. One of the supply caches established near the expedition's entry route had been destroyed. Not looted, destroyed. Barrels smashed, food burned, equipment scattered. At first, investigators blamed smaller monsters, perhaps Jagras, perhaps environmental damage. The loss was frustrating but manageable. They still possessed enough supplies to continue, so they pushed forward. And somewhere, high above the valley, a Rathalos watched. Day 6, the first bridge burned. Not a constructed bridge, a natural stone crossing covered in thick vegetation. The only easy route back toward the expedition's original entry point. Witnesses reported seeing smoke shortly after sunrise. By the time scouts arrived, the crossing had collapsed. Evidence suggested intense fire damage had weakened the structure before part of it gave way. The team debated turning back, but alternate routes still existed, longer routes, more difficult routes, yet still possible, so they adapted, they continued, and the Rathalos continued watching. By day 8, people began noticing something strange. They never saw the monster clearly, but they kept feeling observed. Shadows moving across distant ridges, brief silhouettes crossing clouds, the sensation of something circling beyond visual range. One hunter described it in his journal. "Every time I look up, I feel like I'm already too late." At the time, nobody understood what he meant. Later, everyone would. The second supply cache disappeared entirely, not damaged, gone. Storage containers had been thrown down a cliff face, food stores ruined, medical supplies scattered across inaccessible terrain. Again, the destruction made little sense. Predators didn't benefit from it. Scavengers couldn't have caused it. It was wasteful, deliberate, targeted. The team finally concluded a large monster was responsible. But even then, their assumptions were wrong, because they believed they were dealing with territorial aggression, a warning, a display, something meant to drive them away. What they didn't realize was that every destroyed cache reduced their ability to leave. Day 9. A team member documented their observations, afraid they might not make it out alive. The journal entry was recovered months later. At the time, nobody paid much attention to it. Looking back, it may have been the moment the expedition finally understood what was happening. We finally saw it today. It wasn't hunting. It wasn't resting. It was watching the valley, watching us. And when it realized we had seen it, it didn't move. Day 10, the first direct attack. It happened during a scouting expedition. A small group attempted to locate an alternate route out of the valley. They never reached their destination. Witnesses reported a sudden shadow passing overhead, a deafening roar, an explosion of fire. The attack lasted less than 30 seconds. Then the Rathalos vanished. No prolonged battle, no attempt to finish the survivors, no pursuit. It struck, injured one scout, destroyed climbing equipment, and left. The behavior confused everyone. A typical territorial monster would have pressed the advantage. This one didn't, because killing wasn't the objective. Not yet. The objective was control. The realization emerged slowly, painfully, one observation at a time. Every damaged cache had been positioned near potential escape routes. Every collapsed trail connected to pathways leading outward. Every attack targeted personnel responsible for navigation or mobility. Never random victims, never random locations. The pattern was impossible to ignore. Someone finally voiced the thought nobody wanted to consider. What if it's hurting us? The camp fell silent, because once spoken aloud, the idea explained everything. The next morning confirmed their fears. The expedition attempted a direct retreat. They abandoned equipment, reduced weight, moved quickly. For several hours, nothing happened. Hope returned. Maybe they had overestimated the threat. Maybe escape remained possible. Then they reached another crossing, burned, collapsed, fresh damage, recent damage, damage that couldn't have occurred days earlier. The Rathalos had anticipated their route. It had moved ahead and cut them off before they arrived. That was the moment panic truly began. Because predators react, predators chase, predators defend. But this required planning. The monster wasn't responding to their movements. It was predicting them. Night became unbearable. People stopped sleeping. Every distant wing beat triggered alarm. Every shadow became suspicious. Every silence felt intentional. The valley itself seemed transformed. Not because the environment changed, but because the survivors finally understood their position within it. They weren't explorers, they weren't researchers, they weren't hunters. They were prey. And prey rarely knows how thoroughly a predator understands its territory. The Rathalos knew every cliff, every canyon, every thermal current, every choke point, every route. The expedition knew none of them. The outcome had never been equal. Day 12, the expedition split. It was a desperate decision. One group would create a distraction. The other would attempt to escape. Under normal circumstances, dividing forces is dangerous. Under these circumstances, it seemed necessary. The plan failed immediately because the Rathalos ignored the decoy group. Completely, it attacked the escape group instead, as if it already knew which team posed the greater threat, as if it understood their intentions before they acted. The survivors began discussing impossible questions. How long had it been watching? How much did it know? How many of their choices had actually been choices? The answer arrived through a journal recovered months later. One researcher had documented unusual observations from the expedition's earliest days. Large circular flight patterns, repeated sightings from distant elevations, consistent monitoring behavior, signs that the Rathalos had noticed them almost immediately upon entering the valley. Not day 4, not day 6, day 1. Perhaps even earlier. The monster had observed their arrival, tracked their camp placements, studied their movements, identified supply locations, mapped their behavior, and then it acted systematically, methodically, patiently, like an apex predator determining the safest way to eliminate unfamiliar intruders. Food shortages intensified. Water became difficult to secure. Equipment deteriorated. Morale collapsed. Yet the Rathalos remained frustratingly selective. Whenever survivors attempted dangerous routes deeper into the valley, the attacks lessened. Whenever they attempted routes leading outward, the attacks intensified. The pattern became undeniable. There was only one direction the monster allowed them to travel: inward. Toward the center of its territory, toward a region no maps documented, toward somewhere the Rathalos clearly wanted them to go, or perhaps somewhere it knew they could never leave. The final phase of the hunt began near a massive volcanic basin hidden within the valley's interior. Ancient rock formations surrounded the area. Towering cliffs blocked visibility. Thermal updrafts created ideal flying conditions. Perfect Rathalos territory. Perfect control. Perfect isolation. By the time the survivors arrived, their options were gone. Behind them lay burned routes, collapsed crossings, destroyed supplies, exhaustion, injury, fear. Ahead of them lay only the basin, the heart of the Sky King's domain, and above them, the constant silhouette of a circling predator. One survivor later described the feeling, not fear of being attacked, fear of understanding, the realization that the monster had never lost track of them, not once. Every camp, every discussion, every escape attempt, every hope, observed from above, measured, evaluated, countered. The Rathalos hadn't trapped them because it was unusually aggressive. It trapped them because that strategy worked. Because minimizing risk benefits predators, because controlling prey is safer than chasing prey, because intelligence doesn't need human reasoning to become terrifying, only effectiveness. The final confrontation occurred 3 days later. Accounts differ. Details remain uncertain, but several facts are consistent. The Rathalos attacked repeatedly. The survivors fought desperately. The basin offered almost no escape routes. Visibility was limited. Resources were exhausted. Most importantly, the monster held every environmental advantage. The battle wasn't occurring on neutral ground. It was occurring exactly where the Rathalos wanted it. Exactly where it had been guiding them all along. The hunt ended there. Not because the monster suddenly became stronger, but because the survivors had already lost long before the battle began. Months later, a larger guild operation entered the region. They expected to recover remains, investigate ecological anomalies, perhaps eliminate an unusually aggressive Rathalos. Instead, they discovered something far more unsettling. Evidence suggested the behavior wasn't random. The damaged routes, the destroyed supplies, the targeted attacks, the territorial funneling, everything aligned with practical predatory logic. Nothing required supernatural intelligence. Nothing required human-level planning. Only an apex predator with extensive territorial knowledge and enough experience to recognize patterns. The Rathalos wasn't acting like a monster. It was acting like a ruler removing uncertainty, reducing threats, controlling outcomes, using the environment as effectively as claws or fire. And that's what makes the story so disturbing, because the most frightening possibility isn't that the Rathalos thought like a human, it's that it didn't have to. A creature doesn't need human intelligence to become terrifying. It only needs to be smarter than its prey. In ecosystems across the Monster Hunter world, countless creatures survive by understanding territory better than anything that enters it. Most of the time, that intelligence remains invisible. Hunters arrive. Monsters roar. Battles begin. Simple, direct, understandable, but occasionally you encounter something older, more experienced, a predator that has spent years mastering every inch of its domain. A creature capable of turning geography itself into a weapon. And when that happens, you may discover that the hunt started long before you realized you were participating in it. Imagine standing in an unfamiliar valley. Your supplies are disappearing. The trails behind you are gone. The routes ahead feel wrong. Every time you look toward the sky, you catch a glimpse of movement, a distant silhouette, a shape circling beyond the clouds, watching, always watching. You tell yourself you're imagining things, that if danger were real, it would attack, it would roar, it would reveal itself. But it doesn't, because it already knows where you're going. It already knows what you'll choose. And somewhere above the clouds, the king of the skies patiently waits for you to reach the place he selected days ago. The place where the hunt ends, and where, perhaps, it truly began. If a Rathalos is watching you from above, the most dangerous moment may not be when it attacks. It may be when it decides not to.
This report remains under investigation. The Guild closed this case. The archives did not.